Well, Brian, I guess you could say heaven needed a podcast here on the series finale of Pantheon Plus. Tonight, we discuss and review the Iron Claw.
The challengers from Denton, Texas, weighing in at a combined weight of 690 pounds, Kevin, Kerry, and David Von Erich.
Look at my beautiful brothers.
The Von Erichs are the greatest family in the history of wrestling.
Heaven needed a champion. That's why he took you. Heaven needed a champion. But God knows we need you too. Heaven needed a champion.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jerome Cuson. My co-host, of course, is Brian. The two of us are here tonight on the series finale of Pantheon Plus. We have been teasing this for the last couple of months as we have ended the Superhero Pantheon project. And tonight we are finishing up with the real world. I think now is as good of a time as any right here at the top, just to kind of indicate our plan. We'll go over the plan in just a moment, but I want to thank some individuals associated with the real world, as this is our last podcast on the Real World Podcasting Network. First and foremost, I would like to thank Matt Waters for doing a lot of the backstage work in terms of uploading these episodes. I know that he is going to be relieved to never see an email from me again with a file uploaded to it. So Matt Waters, especially, thank you so much for putting in a lot of the work, uploading these episodes, making sure that people can actually listen to them. I also want to thank Matt for co-hosting a couple of shows with us along the way here, as we have done a number of crossover episodes. Your Iron Man 3 opinion is still wrong, but thank you nonetheless. On that same note of co-hosting, I also would like to thank Ben Phillips, who has done a lot of the legwork on those crossover shows, as he has done the work with the spreadsheets, putting the lists together. Last time he asked some of the burning questions. So I want to thank Ben for his work with the real world. And finally, I would like to thank Mike Thomas as well. Mike Thomas is the person who owns the real world. And I would like to thank him for giving us a lifeline. We used to be, when we were doing Superhero Pantheon, we were a non-wrestling podcast on Pro Wrestling Ponderings. And once Michael Elgin decided that he wanted to sue the websites, that is when I decided that it was best for this podcast to separate and go someplace else. Look, I'm not going to say anything about Michael Elgin except to say he is not on my Christmas card list, which I cannot get sued over. But I will say that I'm very happy with our time at the real world over the course of the last 3 years. Brian and I have been doing this podcast in some form or fashion as either Superhero Pantheon or Pantheon Plus since January 1st of 2018. And what you know it, January 2nd, 2024 will be the start of our new project, which we will talk about in just a second. I've thanked a lot of people. And of course, I know that Brian and I are going to be continuing. But Brian, I also just want to thank you as well. You have taken on some of the editing roles over the last few months. And it has been a great 6 years, and I look forward to doing more podcasts. But if I'm going to thank everybody, I rightfully need to thank the person that I've been co-hosting with. So, Brian, any thank yous that you want to say, anything else that you want to say about the real world before we unveil our next project?
I echo your sentiments for sure, and it's a little sad, but this is kind of like a new chapter, and Jerome's always going to be the Ebert to my Roper, or the Roper to my Ebert, or the Siskel to my Ebert. Who knows? Depending on what generation you watch that show. For me, it was Ebert and Roper. So I've enjoyed this journey, and it's been kind of cool doing the whole superhero movie thing, and then exploring different kind of movies once we wanted to kind of break out from that kind of doldrums we were going through with the Superhero Pantheon. But now, we're going to a new, I'll let you announce it later, but a new space, so to speak. And yeah, we're kind of branching off on our own now. I've been podcasting with Jerome since the day I met him, like literally. Like I hit him up at a PWG show that he was going to back in 2012. He came all the way out here representing Pro Wrestling Ponderings, and we podcasted that night. And ever since then, we've been podcasting together about wrestling, and then we moved on to superhero movies and now all kinds of movies and shows.
The best tacos I've ever had came off the truck, so I also want to point that out.
Rest in peace, Priscilla's Taco Truck on Reseda and Canby Avenue. I actually work close to there now, like a couple blocks, which is kind of ironic, but yeah, that's kind of the way my life has turned around. I used to been wanting to, like, when I met Jerome in 2012, I was working far away, like 4 or 5 miles from the building at Reseda, and now I work so close to it all these years later, and I'm still podcasting with Jerome, so that's pretty awesome. And I look forward to our future, and like I said, if we had a syndicated show in the 70s, we would definitely be wearing like some crazy clothing, like that picture you showed me of Siskel and Ebert in the 70s. But that's kind of our vibe, man. Like we're those old school cats that like to watch classic movies or new movies and just debate about them and have fun with them and feel like intellectuals. You know what I mean? Because that's this show, man. And I've been enjoying it, and I look forward to more podcasts in the future and all the stuff we're planning. And I'm kind of taking over the producer role, so it's going to be fun. We're actually going to be on YouTube this time, not visually, but a lot of people these days have been doing the audio visualizer, so that's kind of the direction we're going. And we'll probably mix it up with some fun images and here and there and some links and stuff like that. So we're moving on to the future, and I'm enjoying the ride.
I mean no disrespect to those who do video podcasting, because I know that it does take a lot of work, but it takes a lot of work, and from a visual standpoint, unless you have the right setup, it looks like crap. Like if you like wearing a microphone on camera just looks really weird to me, and that is not something that I want to put myself through. So that is one of the many, many reasons that I do not want to do video podcasting, and it just looks weird sometimes. And unless you have good internet connection and living in the United States, you don't really get that. It's not ideal. So what Brian and I are going to be doing beginning next week, January 2nd, 2024, we are going to be introducing a brand new YouTube channel. It will also be on the same podcast feed as well, so you do not need to change anything there. We will be calling our channel From the Queue. And Brian, this is a name that Kevin, Brian, and I have come up with. Kevin and I will be doing our thing, continuing to do that as well through From the Queue. This is very exciting. From the Queue makes sense because we are constantly going to be pulling movies and TV shows from the list, the never-ending queue of shows and movies. So it is a very fitting name. I guess we do have to give some credit to Netflix for that. But Brian has been putting in a lot of the work. We have kind of a branding signal, and we've got a YouTube channel. We are going to be working on getting some social media accounts with Instagram, Threads, probably Blue Sky, probably not Twitter or X for so many reasons. But that is our channel name. That will be Brian and I, as we will continue to be doing weekly shows, but also Kevin and I will be doing monthly shows as well. We'll be continuing with that. Kevin and I do not have a podcast name yet, but we will very soon. But I could tell you channel name From the Queue. And Brian, I took the channel glory. I am going to let you announce our new podcast name, which I know that you and I are both very excited about.
Yes, so it's called the Not Content Podcast. Kind of an ironic name, I guess, if you want to put it that way, but all kinds of content. And sometimes people, consider content not content. So it's kind of the opposite or whatever. We'll have fun with it. And it's going to be a constant. It's more like a general title. We'll have like projects underneath that title, so to speak. There's definitely that baseball project coming around sometime this summer, all the way to the end of the baseball season that we're planning. So there's that coming, plus special episodes here and there where we might review a show. We might review a movie. Who knows? But there's been some talks, and I think moonlighting is definitely on the table. And I think Star Trek: The Next Generation is definitely on the table. But I think in January, we're not going to announce quite everything yet, but we're going to have some fun probably going back to some classic favorites that everyone loves.
For sure. So what we are going to be doing starting next week. Next week will be the very first episode of the Not Content podcast. And I think the ethos is that I think that branding things as content, I think it's kind of crappy. I think it really kind of diffuses the value of our movies and TV shows. So ironically, we're going to put the name in our podcast, but it's very much the ethos. I think that treating things as content, treating things as just a tile on a streaming board, so to speak, I mean, it's kind of gross. And I think that what we want to do whenever we review any movie or TV shows, treat it with the respect it deserves, whether it is good, bad, or somewhere in between. This also allows us, if we want to return to the superhero genre at some point, not necessarily for Pantheon consideration, but we may return to the superhero genre at some point. But tonight is actually going to be part one of our discussion on the Iron Claw. 15 glorious minutes into this podcast, we're going to finally get to the topic at hand, which is the Iron Claw. Tonight, our focus is going to be just on the movie itself. We are strictly going to focus on the movie itself. And then next week, we are going to expand our conversation, and we are going to get into some of the lore of the Von Erich family. There are so many resources out there that we are going to discuss in just a moment. But Brian, why are we ending with the Iron Claw? What makes this such a fitting end to our run with the real world?
Well, I mean, we're always dropping these wrestling references, and as I mentioned before, I speak Mark every day, as in like heels, faces, saying the word gimmick at work, all kinds of shit like that. And tying in it with the fact that we're reviewing movies, it just kind of fits this full circle thing. Our last review is going to be a movie about wrestling, and probably one of the more higher profile wrestling movies to come out since The Wrestler, and probably, I don't know, Wrestler's as high as you can go, I think. So, and this is getting more acclaim. I don't know if it's going to get the Oscar nominations it deserves. We'll find out, but that's a whole other discussion for a different day. But as for this movie, as standing on its own, it's very good. I just feel like there's some missing things here and there, not necessarily tied to historical accuracy, just more of like motivation and stuff like that, but told from a certain perspective of the sole living survivor of those brothers, Kevin Von Erich. From that perspective, I think the movie works very well. Even when it takes things out of order in the timeline, it does it for the narrative, to further the narrative, make more sense to the audience. And I think this works for the general audience really well to connect with, like, I'm not really a wrestling fan. I do know Hulk Hogan and The Rock and all that stuff. And then, going into this movie, they're going to connect to it really well.
I mean, this movie, I was surprised in how much it got into the weeds, like mentioning Harley Race. I mean, Ric Flair's kind of to be expected given his role, but like really diving in, like using Jerry Jarrett's name, talking about the NWA, like Sam Mushnick is mentioned in this movie. I mean, clearly there was a lot of research to be done, and given all the material that has been released in the last 20 years or so, beginning with the Heroes of World Class documentary that came out in the 2000s, and that is probably one of the most important resources, I would say, because there is, of course, an interview with Kevin. There's an interview with some of the officials, Bill Mercer, some of the producers, Mickey Grant, Gary Hart. So I would highly, highly recommend that people watch that documentary. As a matter of fact, Brian has a homework assignment for next week. By next week, he will have watched Heroes of World Class for the very first time. So, Brian, that is 2 hours and 40 minutes. And I will look forward to your thoughts on that documentary next week when we expand our conversation of the Iron Claw. And I will be doing some homework of my own. I will be rewatching a couple of the world-class Dark Sides of the Ring, and that'll help us kind of expand the conversation. I also want to point out Irv Mushnick did an article all the way back in 1988 about the Von Erich family that is a great primary resource, kind of on-the-ground reporting. I would also be remiss if I did not mention The Last Fan. They did Brian, I know Brian loves this, like 25 hours of podcasting about world-class championship wrestling.
Yeah,
They're
but how
not
many hours is that? It's impersonations. To be fair, I like Laps Fan, but a third of it is impersonations. For crying out loud.
and some people will find it funny and some people won't. I clearly am amused by it most of the time. All I'm going to say is it is well worth your time to go listen to those episodes because there is a lot of very valuable information that a lot of the documentaries just don't get into. You get into the Gino Hernandez of it all. You also get into the Bruiser Brody, plus some of what happened after World Class shut down in the Texas area. So all of that is well worth checking out, either before or after you have seen this movie. But as we mentioned, we are going to be discussing the film, the focus of our conversation tonight, and we'll get into some of the lore, so to speak, next week. So I just want to say, the way that I think about this movie is that I almost think that part of the disadvantage that Brian and I have is that we know so much already. So we are coming into this with a lot of expectations of portrayals and things of that nature. We also come into this with a lot of knowledge, simple knowledge about what we know happened. And like for example, there is a missing Von Erich brother that is just simply not involved in the movie. So that's something that we'll get more into next week. But just knowing all of that, I think, is going to affect the way that we see this movie. And I think in some ways, maybe it's better off almost if you don't know a lot about the Von Erich lore, because I think you could just walk into this and just have a greater appreciation, kind of let it wash over you, and then kind of look into some of the very dark and depressing times of this organization. Because as much tragedy as the movie covers, it doesn't even come close to really hitting on all of the points outside of the Von Erich family and some of the things that happened. And again, even within the Von Erich family, really not portraying the divorce of Doris and Fritz and Chris, of course. But just taking this movie on its own, I mean, it's very clearly something that was done very well researched. The look and the design of the movie. I think, Brian, I want your thoughts on this, because one of my favorite moments of the movie, not even a piece of dialogue or conversation, but it's when the camera starts outside the sportatorium. This is very early on. They just kind of go around the sportatorium and they just let us see all the various characters and fans, and just showing kind of the intensity and the love for Texas wrestling. And I wish that we almost had a little bit more of that, of the fans, because they were so important to it. But it really captured the flavor and the time.
Yeah, man, it reminded me of the outside of the Reseda Legion Hall when at a PWG show. That vibe, that community feel that sometimes wrestling does to the fandom. If you see the same fans every week, especially at the Sportatorium, of course you're gonna have your cliques and stuff like that, and have tailgate parties just like a football game. You know what I mean? And I love that vibe. And man, when I saw that, because I was watching with some wrestling friends, I whispered like, "Dude, we're in Reseda right now," and they just fucking smiled. And just I saw that, like they were remembering too, man, and then kind of relating that memory. So that's pretty awesome. You know what I mean? Like that I've lived those moments, you know what I mean, at that building. So I know exactly what those Sportatorium fans were going through at that time, the fandom living through the Von Erich family. That was a perfect setup to it, because then it becomes like, oh, this is like a whole, like a city thing. Like it's more than a city thing. It's like a statewide love for these wrestlers. So I love that scene at the beginning, and of course it just had me, thinking about the old days. So that was great. And I gotta mention too, like I watched it in Dolby, which I was kind of like taken aback by. Like I didn't expect this movie to be a Dolby AMC kind of screening, but I guess because they really heightened the color, like they really sharpened the colors in this movie. So I really love that part of it. The reds were so bright, the blues were great. There was like they rose the contrast a little bit, and I feel like that really helped with the colors and how that 80s vibe kind of looked. Even the outside of the Sportatorium, it looked great for that lighting and the colors and what everyone was wearing in their costumes. So they nailed the costumes for sure, and they nailed the casting. I think they did aesthetically a lot of things right. That we were expecting. That hopefully, I mean, it's 2023. Hopefully they can. Everyone loves the nostalgia movies, shows, Stranger Things. We felt like, or at least my friends going in, that they definitely nailed the aesthetic going in based on the trailer. So that was really cool. And the performances kind of lived up to that. So I was really impressed by the look of this movie. And, like I said, I wasn't, expecting this to be a Dolby screening. And then I get the ticket and I'm like, what's going on here? And then I was kind of, I was like, okay, it's the colors. The colors are really over the top, and it really brings things to life, especially in the wrestling scenes.
I agree. I think the performances are absolutely the strongest aspect of this movie. And I think if this movie does achieve any awards success, it is going to be because of this, because of the performances across the board. I think it's really impressive to me just what everybody was able to do. Zac Efron is very clearly seems to me he's the kind of the godfather of this project in terms of getting it done, getting it produced. I mean, he is the lead character in this movie playing Kevin Von Erich. I'm not sure ultimately if he's the best choice in terms of the look. I mean, I think the performance is very good, and I think he does a great job in the ring and in terms of getting the body. I don't even want to know what he did to achieve it, but you certainly put the work in, and he definitely looked very well, so to speak. But you got a Jeremy Allen White. I don't know about you, Brian, but I was surprised how little Jeremy Allen White as Kerry Von Erich was in this movie. Like, he's definitely a supporting player in this, but I don't know that his screen time is any bigger than David or Mike, and David is dead halfway through the movie, and Mike is dead about 15 minutes later. So it's just surprising to me that Jeremy Allen White was not in this movie more, but obviously he's a very busy man these days, shooting The Bear, shooting his other projects. Harris Dickinson, I think he does a very good job as David Von Erich. Would it surprise you to know that he is an English actor?
Not surprising at all these days, because apparently British actors have the best Southern accent somehow. I don't know how that works. I don't know how it works.
So yeah, I mean, I think those three performances are really good. Stanley Simons to me steals the show. I don't know about you, but the work that he does as Mike, and to me, Mike is, in terms of the tragedy of all tragedies, and there's a lot in the Von Erich family, but in terms of what Mike represents and just what he was, and having to become a wrestler, even though he clearly did not want to be a wrestler, clearly did not have a lot of athletic skill. I do have to say that it was really Stanley Simons' performance as Mike Von Erich kind of stole the show for me, especially his face when Fritz is in the ring proclaiming him to be a future world champion, and his reactions in the press conference. Just a tremendous performance.
Yeah, that was tough to watch. You know what I mean? Especially after watching The Dark Side of the Ring a couple years ago, knowing the story. Yeah, he should never been in the ring. I mean, clearly, I don't know. Maybe his motivations in real life, but clearly the fictionalized version of Mike should not have been in the ring. Clearly, physically, his body was not meant for it in this story. In real life, kind of comparing it to the real life, yeah, he was built, but the way they portrayed it here, clearly he should not have been in the ring, and he gets hurt, and that's the whole story. It's so heartbreaking. But it's the whole thing about doing it for your father or doing it for your family, and he can't live out his own dream as being a musician. And I love that scene at the when they were having that dinner, when they meet Pam for the first time, and you reveal that Fritz was this musician, and all of a sudden things start clicking in Mike's head, but he knows that he can't go for that because his father gave up on it, so he can't give up. He has to give up on it too. So that was really, I thought, really good writing right there. And I think him singing this, I think he was really singing the songs, I think, actually too, and playing the guitar really. That had to have been him. It looked so good. I don't know if that was a tape player, but he was definitely singing, it felt like. And that scene where they're all the brothers at the party, and it was just, that was a really great moment, before the downfall kind of thing. But yeah, he did a really great job. I felt like they needed more time to develop the reasoning behind his suicide in the movie. I mean, it's probably, something deep down that you can't really express visually, maybe, I don't know, but there's something about that, trying to be David right after his death and trying to replace him as the family champion or whatever. I think they needed to focus more on that, but I feel like there's like a 3-hour cut of this movie that kind of dives deeper into more of the other Von Erichs besides being Kevin the focus.
Yeah, I mean, give it to me. Give me all the deleted scenes, put them all in. If it's a 3-hour cut, then that is what I want in this life. Holt McElhaney as Fritz Von Erich. So it's funny to me. So Kevin and I did a discussion of the first of the 2 seasons of Mindhunter, and one of the things that we would joke about is the 2 main characters would go to Atlanta, so we would make jokes about like where is the shot of them watching Georgia Championship Wrestling in 1980, not really realizing that Holt McElhaney was going to play Fritz Von Erich of all people in the Iron Claw. Not only was he going to play Fritz Von Erich, but he apparently listened to The Last Fan and is apparently a huge wrestling fan. Holt McElhaney, I mean, this is the best performance in the movie by a wide margin, and I think that a lot of the performances are good. I would not like. I'm looking at this list here of just the main performances, and I would say they are all above average. But to me, Holt McElhaney brings it all together. When the Von Erich boys win the 6-man titles and his promo afterwards, like I wanted to go to the Sportatorium just to watch Fritz cut promos, and I think Fritz is a genuine piece of crap, but Holt McElhaney is just incredible. He above everybody else. He better be nominated for something. I don't know what, but he absolutely deserves to be nominated. He's the best.
Yeah, he was incredible, man. And this is the other thing I noticed too. It feels like because I don't know, they're actors or whatever, but they're cutting better promos than the actual Von Erich did, and that's certainly the case for David Von Erich, because David Von Erich was a good promo, but the guy who played him was just so much better. And then it's the same thing with Fritz. Holt is like I don't know on another level. He's channeling like that wrestling screaming energy.
I'll say this. David Von Erich's promos are really good. I don't know. I mean, I think Harris Dickinson does a comparable job. I don't want to say better. David was really strong. Kevin and Carrie, their promos were always awkward and bad and not very good. Fritz was an above average talker, but I mean, Holt McElhaney was transformative in terms of promos. I mean, he's very underrated. I don't know how much you've seen him in, but I mean, you look at him in Mindhunter, he's very, very good.
Yeah, he was so incredible. I felt like he stole the show sometimes. I don't know, just because of that charisma. And then I don't know about you, but that beginning scene with him as like the opening, and it was in black and white. That was like, oh, give me Raging Bull. Like, give me a whole 60s movie or 70s wrestling movie in black and white, like Raging Bull or something, and I'm down. Because that beginning with him, like cutting the promo, or not cutting a promo, but just talking to his wife about how he's almost there. I'm almost at the top, and I'm like, oh, dude, that's like one of the top conversations people in the upper mid card say to themselves when they're trying to raise to the top. And it feels like it's just like you could picture so many wrestlers saying that exact thing, knowing that he's probably not going to get to the top, and he doesn't. He never gets to the top. And then, of course, that leads to his kids with the whole Von Erich storyline of taking the world title home, right? So, yeah, man, it's just, I don't know, just, it's crazy that I think people now are going to assume that Fritz Von Erich was this incredible promo who have never seen him before based on the other guy's performance.
I mean, I would say that Fritz is still a good talker, but I mean, Holt McElhaney has to do a lot of the legwork here, bringing everything together. I obviously, in terms of this movie, the female roles are not going to get the respect that they deserve, but I do have to give props to Maura Tierney as Doris. I think her best scene is with Pam when she talks about wearing the same dress to Mike's funeral as David's. I mean, it's really heartbreaking. But this movie certainly does not pull punches. I mean, Doris is very much an accomplice to Fritz's insanity in this movie. And I mean, you have to believe that to an extent that is the truth, even though they did get divorced in 1992. But very clearly, Doris is an important part as the matriarch of this family. And I do have to say, Lily Jones is a mixed bag. This is probably one of the best things that she's ever done. I think her performance as Pam, like, she really does feel like a character. It would be so easy for her to just be woman on phone, but she is really kind of a character unto herself. In fact, like, she becomes a veterinarian, seemingly becomes the breadwinner at some point. in the movie, and definitely feels like she has her own agency. And I don't know, like I get Zac Efron is probably responsible for this movie being made, but if this movie had been done from Pam's perspective, I think that would have actually made for something really interesting.
Yeah, because she's more of the audience, pseudo audience. You know what I mean? She's like asking all the questions on the first date, and then that way the audience gets to know the family and the history, and that's where you learn about the older brother that passed away at 5 years old that they never talk about, which is tragic. And then, God, seeing that scene at the end just made me. Oh, that was the one scene that got me crying. Was that scene at the end with the brothers in heaven, man? Because I have a little, I have a sister, uh, a younger sister that. Quite unfortunately didn't make it through the birth, you know what I mean, but she was 9 months old, or 9 months. My mom was 9 months pregnant, and stillborn child. So seeing that scene made me think of my sister, like straight up, like, is that what it's going to be like? Am I going to see my sister in heaven or something like that? Like, who knows? But it was very, very thought-provoking, that scene. All things considering, like suicide and what that means to a Catholic and Christians in general. So it was a very deep emotional scene for me, that ending. But yeah, just in terms of like Lily James, I felt like she was like the pseudo audience, right? And then asking all the questions, and then that scene where she hugs him, I was like, oh, I've been there, man. I've been there in that same conversation with with a chick on a date, man. And then talking about my sister that she
I really like that. That might be my favorite scene in the movie. Actually, is the one in the restaurant, because it kind of feels like the beginning scene in The Godfather. You know what I'm talking about, when Michael is at the wedding.
Yep.
Kay,
yeah, that's exactly. You're right. You're right. That's what it feels like. He's bringing her into the world. You know what I mean? But yeah, I had that exact moment talking about my sister on a date, and like a hug I got from the girl. It was like the same thing. I guess it's one of those similar stories when you lose a sibling that it really gets people to like come out and hug you and feel sorry. But hey, man, she really brought the emotions out of Kevin too, and like even the sex scene, I thought was like, okay, we're doing a sex scene, that's kind of random, but then it actually meant something. So like it brought out like
we're going to be accurate to the Von Erich family. There probably should have been a lot more.
Yeah, for sure.
I just want to point out. I'm going to make a Bohemian Rhapsody comparison for the first and only time in the history of this podcast. Have you seen Bohemian Rhapsody, Brian?
Yes.
So I hate that movie with a fiery passion. But if you'll notice in that movie, the only person who does drugs or cheats on their significant other is Freddie Mercury. The other members of the band are never portrayed to be doing drugs or cheating on their wives. Would you say that is accurate to real life?
No, sir.
Did you notice in the Iron Claw that they never showed Kevin Von Erich getting fucked up or cheating on his wife?
Exactly. But for the record, from what I've seen and heard, he's like a marijuana guy now. Kind of like he kind of chilled out with marijuana.
He was very much a drug person, not just marijuana.
And not just that. I mean, God, I heard that I don't listen to the Jake Roberts podcast regularly, but he did mention like how the Von Erichs were always kind of like loaded in the ring, even Kevin. So that, I feel like, yeah, the movie does let him off the hook, but it's kind of, I don't know.
A little bit of steroid use. They show Carrie doing some coke at some point, but I mean, they definitely are pretty light on the drugs, and I think you almost have to be to an extent, or else that's what the movie becomes. Like, I don't want this movie to become just a drug movie either. And I think the movie has a very tough balance, because predominantly this is the story of the 1980s, and it doesn't really feel like an 80s movie. This movie also takes place in Texas with oil money playing such a huge role. And yes, the Von Erich tragedy, of course, plays a role in the realities of world class and what went downhill, so to speak. But you also cannot discount the oil money going away from Texas as the 80s progressed, and you get into the 90s and the economy of that city kind of going down the tubes. That undoubtedly has an effect, but you're not necessarily going to get that in a movie that has so much story to tell in 2 hours. And sometimes it feels, I mentioned The Godfather earlier. I almost wish that is the approach that was taken here. If, instead of doing a movie that's 2 hours and 12 minutes, do a 3-hour Godfather-like opus where you kind of start at either Christmas dinner or wedding, introduce us to all the players, and then just really sprawl this universe out and really explore things a little bit more. And look, I understand that this is intended to be a wrestling movie, but I did not need to see full matches with fake Harley Race and fake Ric Flair. And the Harley Race casting was pretty decent, but I know that you were especially not a fan of the Ric Flair impersonator.
Yeah, I feel like it was an impersonation and not an not an actor trying to be an actor. You know what I mean? Like, God, I mean, Will Ferrell did a better job as Ric Flair in Eastbound and Down when he was doing an impersonation of Ric Flair as a car dealer, or as a car dealer or whatever, like owner or whatever. It was just like, how can that be possible that he was so much better as Ric Flair than this guy playing Ric Flair? So that's kind of where I'm at, and I'm not the only one who feels that way. I feel bad for the guy because he probably didn't know what he was getting into. I don't know if the guy playing Ric Flair wasn't even a wrestling fan, but when he goes woo and his voice breaks and cracks, I was like, oh, he does not know how to do a woo well at all, and it just kind of ruined the moment. And it's weird because we see Kevin versus Ric Flair, but we don't see Kerry versus Ric Flair. So here's the thing: like with the budget comes in, it's like a $16 million budget almost, whatever, and like we know Texas Stadium, Parade of Champions '84, May of '84 is like 40 something thousand people, and we only see it like in a pseudo background shot. It's like it felt like, oh, that was like a COVID decision or something. You know what I mean? Like they really cut back on the budget on that scene. They should have shown
again,
it.
Jeremy Allen White is not in this movie very much, and that is he also doesn't wrestle as much. You barely see him in the ring. I mean, he's in the ring a couple times, but really he's just throwing punches. He really isn't doing a lot of wrestling maneuvers. And again, you look at Kerry's body, you look at what Jeremy Allen White. Jeremy Allen White is in ridiculously good shape, but he does not have anywhere close to the musculature of Kerry Von Erich. And I mean, look, if he doesn't want to do steroids or whatever to get the body, I certainly don't blame him. But I definitely think that is to me that would be a reason to not have Kerry in the ring as much within the context of the movie. And like I said, I could have almost just done without the wrestling. I didn't like if you want to have highlights, like I get showing them in the ring a couple times. I get like capturing that ambiance, but I did not need to see the two full wrestling matches. I think that time could have been used in a much more productive way.
Yeah, it was just kind of weird, but I guess it was to appeal to fans and show that they actually trained the actors to wrestle because it was them wrestling. Yeah, and then I don't know, just I did like Harley Race. I wasn't so fan of I like the casting of Bruiser Brody, but I wasn't cool with like the presentation of Bruiser Brody. He seemed too like happy and go lucky. You know what I mean? Like, good looking there, kid. Like, I don't think Brody would say that. I think he would just be like grunting to the ring.
The impression that I always got is that Bruiser Brody actually was not tight with the Von Erichs, but he was in yes, of course, he was all about business, all about money. The impression that I've always gotten is that if he had friends in the wrestling business, the Von Erichs would be somewhat close to that. Because I believe that Fritz had a lot to do with Bruiser Brody breaking in. You know what? This is how big of a nerd I am. If Bruiser Brody had done the job in his tag match, I was going to literally walk out.
See, that's what I felt when I saw the Sheik. Okay, I know people didn't realize it was a Sheik, but Chavo Guerrero played the Sheik, and I know we're getting a little too into part 2, but this kind of ties into it. Like, you know, Sheik would never job. You know what I mean? So I don't know. It just feels like
so I think that was a little bit different, but I mean, I think that the movie I think it does some really good things at times, but it also is obviously not historically accurate. One of the more interesting decisions that is made is so they portray David's death in Japan. I'm glad that they did not portray it inaccurately because in the historical record, it's kind of said that David had a match in Japan when in reality had not had a match in Japan. I'm almost glad that they kind of stayed out of the weeds of the story with, you know, Bruiser throwing drugs down the toilet and whatnot. Like, just stay out of that. It's not really necessary for the story that they're trying to tell. But you have David's death, and then you have Kerry winning the title, which is fine. What did you think of the decision to portray Kerry's motorcycle accident as happening the day that he won the NWA title, as opposed to 1986 when it actually happened?
Okay, here's another thing that I think it needed. It needed more like on-screen uh cues, you know what I mean? Title cards, excuse me, with the year and the date. It needed that because it makes it seem like that, but I don't think it's portrayed as that. Like if you ask the director,
I think that's I
Sean
think that
Durkin.
I think that's exact. I think the implication that they are making is that Kerry Von and I actually don't mind that decision. I think from a narrative standpoint, it's much cleaner. And the reason that they took the title off of Kerry is for that reason, because they didn't want that to happen. So that really doesn't bother me narratively. I would agree with you also that just the timing and everything is just really weird. And I would the impression that I've gotten is that there were some significant editing choices made after some test screenings over the summer. So I don't know if that has to do with some of the confusion, but I will say that I did not mind the decision of having the motorcycle moved up. Did your audience gasp when Carrie walked in with no foot?
Half of them. But I didn't even expect it then because I was like, what are they doing? This seems really early in the timeline, but that's where they went. And I talked about it before. Like that was one of the things I was more interested in this movie about, like how are they going to approach that and portray that? And it's exactly how I've read and seen people talk about it, and the struggle that Carrie went through with 1 foot wrestling. Like to me, it still boggles at my mind that as a kid you watch like a SummerSlam 90, I can't even tell the dude has 1 foot. You know what I mean? And it's like amazing to me that he even fucking got
Well,
a contract.
it is remarkable to me that you could watch SummerSlam 1990 and not even realize it. I mean, it's crazy to me. And here, like I think they do a really good job of showing that struggle. But I mean, it's just I don't know. I mean, I don't know that if you could give the guy credit for it, given what ultimately happened. But I mean, it's wild. I mean, the match with Jerry Lawler in 1988 when he doesn't have a foot, like that's a 4-star classic, and he's doing it on 1 foot.
Yeah, I've seen that match, and again, it's one of those 80s bullshit finishes with blood, but yeah, it's actually one of his better matches outside of a Ric Flair match, you know what I mean? And outside of like a tag with the Freebirds. So I don't know. Because like it's just crazy to me that I don't know. I wanted more focus on it, even though we got a lot of it. I just felt like there should have been more to that story. Like him signing the contract to WWF, I think would have been a great scene to watch. Or someone playing a Vince McMahon, for crying out loud, would have been great. But
No,
they don't go
do
with
you
that
really
route.
playing a Vince McMahon? I don't, because I don't think you could do it right.
I guess, man. But man, that would have been something because it just feels like
Here's the fundamental problem with having actors portray wrestlers. Wrestlers are such characters, especially when you go back into the 1980s, and you are not going to find an actor that can properly capture that charisma for a couple reasons. Number one, because these people are batshit crazy, and number two, there is not enough cocaine these days for them to do it, because that is a huge part. Let's not ever misunderstand the 1980s in cinema, in television, and in wrestling was fueled by cocaine.
absolutely. And I don't know if I wanted more of like a Blow. You ever seen Blow with Johnny Depp?
I have not.
Okay, well, I don't want to say Scarface, but one of those cocaine infused movies. I kind of wanted some of that, but not totally all about that. I know how you just said about like it not being a drug movie, but I think it was lacking some of that because it felt like Carrie was just kind of like, I don't know, he just all of a sudden just dove into drugs, and was it because of Jimmy Carter, right? Of that whole thing, he would have been a wrestler anyway even if he went to the Olympics in 1980. So I don't know.
Also, not necessarily true. I don't think that Kerry was actually going to go to the Olympics. I think that's kind of buying into the lore of the family.
That too, because he didn't even qualify yet. But yeah, that's another thing about this movie. Is just like the weird, like again, the timeline issues that kind of conflict. But again, it's part of like creating a good narrative, and I get that. Even my friends agreed, like they agree with the changes to like expand the narrative. And well, I mean, it kind of bothered me that the Starcade thing, but we'll talk about that in part two when we talk about
Yeah.
the Easter
Oh,
eggs.
yeah. We'll talk about the access that they may or may not have had to some of these shows. So I think that I think they did a pretty good job with the music. I do want to say, in terms of like capturing the ambiance, they did a really good job of kind of showing some of the camera angles. Michael J. Harney as Bill Mercer, I think he does a good job. I mean, Bill Mercer is an important factor to World Class's success, just being that local commentator. Going back to, he was a real journalist. He covered the JFK assassination, and in recent vintage, there was a documentary and there was footage of him actually there. So it's pretty crazy to think, but Bill Mercer, an important factor, and I do have to say I think he does a good job, just kind of playing admittedly it's a small role, but I think it's an important one, and especially the scene where he's done doing the promo with Kevin, and Kevin cannot speak for the life of him, and just his patience, the patience of a saint Bill Mercer had to have, and I really like that. I think it's just, I think it shows. I think what you see is just how professional he is throughout.
Yeah, I thought that was a really cool, like, behind the scenes look, and that's kind of some of the stuff I wish they kind of dig deeper into, but because clearly Kevin is not a promo, he's never been a promo, and they were making fun of that, so that was really cool, man. And Bill Mercer is like a legend in the game, and he's still alive, and they mentioned him on AEW recently, so yeah, just craziness that the fact that he's outlived so many people. I mean, yeah, he's kind of like a miracle considering like all the tragedy that's come to World Class. You would think
He's
that.
Rose Kennedy of World Class. Do you know what that reference is?
Well, say that again.
He is the Rose Kennedy of World Class Championship Wrestling.
Oh God! Based on what the Kennedy name goes by and the reputation, I can only assume it's like the last standing member.
So of course, a lot of the Kennedys were assassinated, but there was Rose Kennedy who lived to be in her 100s. So let me get the exact. So I'm sorry, she lived from July 22nd, 1890 to July 22nd, 1995. She was 104 years old. She was married to Joseph Kennedy Sr.
Okay. So there are some of those, in these like cursed families that do survive, right? Yeah. I mean, good for him, I guess, because he's had a hell of a run, man. And like, maybe it's because he did all the drugs. He did do all those drugs, maybe. You know what I mean? He was like too old at the time to do that kind of cocaine anyway.
He was just around it so much that maybe he just sapped all of their energy and took it for himself.
Maybe, because I mean, 92 years old right now, and he's still. Wasn't he on AEW, or am I just? No, they probably just mentioned him because the Von Erich kids were on there. But yeah, so just a legacy, man. Just quite a legacy as an announcer and on screen. You know what I mean? Like people think JR. You know what I mean? And all the Michael Cole, but this is a name.
This is actually, I think this is a huge problem because I think this is something that, as much as the wrestling is a part of who we are, I think what we build connections to is the announcers, because look, the players come and go, but if you have that local voice, which you, living in Los Angeles, getting to listen to Vin Scully for all those years, like you above everybody else, should really have that. But Chicago's had Jack Brickhouse and Harry Carey. You go to your local wrestling companies, you have your Bill Mercers in Texas. You had Gordon Soley in Florida. You have your who am I trying to think of? Jim Ross in Mid-South, and it's those voices that really carry the day, and I feel like we're missing that. I don't know that people are going to have those fond Michael Cole memories. I mean, maybe some people younger than us do, but I just don't know that you can ever recapture that, and it sucks because I think that is the flavor, the local flavor. Is what makes such a difference, and I think that this movie definitely does a good job of capturing that. Is there anything else about the movie that you would like to discuss? Any important scenes that we missed out on?
Oh, let me see. I think we covered all the big stuff. Like the favorite scenes of mine were already mentioned, like Pam and Kevin on their first date. I really liked a lot, and then of course that end sequence with they're all in heaven. Yeah, all around, like I give it a 7.5, only because I felt like we could have dug so much deeper. But then again, who knows about a mythical director's cut of this movie? Because I would totally be down to watch it as well. But I definitely want it as a show. Like I want this as like a giant mini. People said like this could be 7 seasons. Like that's too much. I think a mini series with like 10 episodes and about 50 minutes each is what we need, and you focus on all the different Von Erich brothers and stuff like that. I think that's kind of what, like, this will still be a great movie to like look back on, but I think you could totally expand this into something even deeper and explore that lore that we're going to talk about next week. But yeah, I enjoyed this a lot, and I think Sean Durkin's third movie, not bad for a third movie. I think maybe the cinematography was a little plain and basic, but I did get the colors looking great, and the sportatorium looked great. But yeah, somehow, Jerome, we always end up in a farm, don't we?
I was thinking about that as I was watching it. I was like, we made so many references to the farm, and here we are again as we have the Von Erichs on a farm. Unfortunately, not as relaxing as some of the other farm movies that we have had a chance to discuss. So just in terms of this movie, I would give this a solid 8 out of 10. I think this is a very, very good movie. And this is probably going to be in probably my top 25 for the year 2023. This has been, as always, a good year for movies. And I definitely think this is a top flight movie. I hope it gets some nominations, especially for Holt McElhaney, especially. But yeah, I think that this is a very good entry in terms of movies about wrestling. Obviously, I think the kind of the crown jewel at this point is The Wrestler in 2008. But over the years we've had a lot of bad ones. We've had your crappy Ready to Rumbles, No Holds Barred, but it's nice to see that we've got a couple of let's say classier wrestling movies in the last few years. This being one of them, The Iron Claw, a very good entry. As mentioned, Brian and I next week for the very first episode of the Not Content podcast, we will be diving into the lore of the Iron Claw. Brian has been assigned the Von Erichs documentary, Heroes of Tragedy, Heroes of World Class. I will be rewatching a couple episodes of Dark Side of the Ring, and we're going to do that next week as part of our new project. Brian, any final words?
Yeah, man, it's the end of an era, but it's kind of cool that we're doing a part 1 and a part 2 leading into the new era. That's kind of cool. Feels very Star Trek Generations, actually. So that's kind of cool as well. See that connection I made there? But anyway, love this movie. I could have loved it even more, but I don't know. Who knows? Maybe it'll grow me even more over time. But I just feel like there's so much left on the table. And the fact that we didn't even get like any talk about the whole Von Erich Freebird feud or anything like that, I thought that would have been a significant part of it. It wasn't.
Said that a couple times, but I don't know. I mean, it's just there's so much that you could do so much, and we'll get into the lore next week, and get into all that. Next week is probably going to be a pretty long one, given all the lore. We're not going to be the last fan, but it's going to be a long one. So, Brian, my name is Jerome, and for the last time here at the Real World, we want to thank you for listening. We will talk to you next week on our new channel.
You want me to do a line?